Name Explain has been built on the foundation that everything has a name, and when I say everything, I mean everything. Even the elements that make up names have names. Of course, I'm referring to the letters and characters that make up all the names in the world, specifically today the Latin alphabet. And while I'm sure we could look at how every letter ended up being called what they are called, today we're going to be looking to the weirdest letter we have in the Latin alphabet, W. Now, there's a couple things interesting with W. First off, it's the only letter in our alphabet that when said has more than one syllable, and also its name is pretty easy to interpret. When you say W, it sounds like you are saying double U, as in the letter two places before it, U twice, which would make sense, except we have the slight issue that W doesn't look like two U's. In fact, not only does it not look like two U's, it looks like two lots of a different letter entirely, V. If you look at this letter, you can instantly see it looks like two V's, not two U's. However, its name doesn't reflect this. Surely it should be called double V. So why is this letter called W? To understand this more, we need to look into the sounds these three letters make in English. V in English sounds like V, U in English sounds like and W in English sounds like a W. However, these sounds aren't constant across all Latin alphabet languages. Take Germanic and other European languages. The letter W makes it sound more akin to what V makes here in English. As an example, just pretend to be a cheesy 50s B-movie Dracula. I want to suck your blood will immediately become I want to suck your blood. For this inconsistency in the sound W makes, we have the Romans to thank, as they loved nothing more than making language weird for us today, as I've come to accept. If you look at the classical Latin alphabet, you'll notice two big omissions. There's no U or W. At this time, there simply doesn't seem to have been a W sound. I'm sure people were able to make the sound.
I have a very great friend in Rome called
but it just wasn't formalized into their language as of yet. I've looked at lists of Roman names and translated words with W in them to Latin, and not a single W pops up. As for U, well, this sound was used in Roman times. We see it in the name of their most famous ruler, Julius Caesar, and with the Latin word for wolf, lupus. However, they didn't have a character for this sound. They just used the V character interchangeably to represent the consonant V sound and the vowel U sound we have in English today. So lupus in ancient Rome would have been spelt more like this. This is something known as an allograph in language terms, where a letter can have different meanings depending on the context. We still have these today in many languages with the use of lower and uppercase letters, which are also allographs. However, I've also read that the V character in Latin was too used to represent the W sound as well. E.g., the famous Julius Caesar quote, Veni Vidi Vici, should actually be pronounced Wendy Widdy Wiki. It's also argued there was no soft C sound either, hence why Vici here is pronounced with a hard K sound, and why others believe Cicero should be called Cicero, Caesar should be pronounced Kaiser, and so on. So going back to our Latin word for wolf, which we pronounce lupus and was spelt with V's, does that mean the Romans would have actually pronounced it whoopus? Was the W sound just another allograph for the Latin V character? I really don't know. I went to a comprehensive, Latin wasn't on the curriculum. Those more learned, please comment below. The real problem here is that we just have no evidence of how the Romans actually spoke their language. While marbles with Latin across them can and have stood the test of time, the spoken word cannot be preserved in that way, other than with technology the Romans simply didn't have. And there's no nation or community or people on earth today still speaking Latin the way Romans did. In these modern times, however, Latin seems to be pronounced in one of two ways. The way Latin is spoken and still used in the Catholic Church, where V's are pronounced how we pronounce them in English, and a guesstimated reconstruction of the Latin spoken a millennia ago, where V's are pronounced how we pronounce W's today. Anyway, what we can say for sure, it seems, is that from this singular Latin character bore three sounds, the modern U, V and W sounds. I really like how in the alphabet V is in between U and W, like a proud parent and its offspring. As time went on, the differences in these three sounds became more distinguished. To start with, let's look at how U came into our alphabet as a letter in its own right. This apparently began to happen in the 14th century, where U was becoming more prominent as a character, though it was used more in the middle of words, so muddy would become muddy with a U, while utopia as we see it would still have remained with a V. And yes, muddy and utopia were literally the first words that came into my head as examples for this. I'm not too sure what that says about myself. U finally cemented its spot in the alphabet when printers standardized the shapes of letters and included both U and V in the 16th century. So what about W, the single letter this silly video is all about? Well, that too needed its own character to represent the sound. However, it seems that this sound didn't actually originally get a character unto itself. Rather, to represent the sound we now associate with W, two U's were written instead. Wait a minute, two U's, like double U's, double U's, double U, double U. W! It all makes sense now. This is something in language called a digraph, where two letters are used to represent one sound, and yes, like with allographs, we still use these today, with the likes of C and H creating the ch sound. Though what seems odd is that this practice apparently started in the 8th century, while the same source website told me that U as a character came into fruition in the 14th century. Honestly, if there's one thing you should take away from this video, it's that letters and words are weird and stupid, and you shouldn't make a career out of trying to figure them out. Now that explains why W's name sounds like W, but it doesn't explain as to why it now looks like two V's instead of two U's. The tradition of W being written with two V's instead of two U's seems to once again come from printers. They knew that V and U could be used pretty interchangeably, and they may have even lacked that newfangled U letter in their set of letters when printing. So if U's and V's could be used interchangeably, then why not just use two V's instead of two U's when wanting to write a W sound? Also, I wouldn't be surprised if the use of V's came from a Germanic influence on the English language either. As we mentioned earlier, in Germanic languages, the W sound still sounds like the English V sound. To them, it perhaps would have made more sense to use two V's instead of two U's. Anyway, it seems that this is what came to be, and over time the two V's that became used to represent this sound squashed together to form a whole new character, one that despite its appearance stuck with a name that referenced its origins as being two U's, W. Clearly they weren't nice enough to think how this may affect people like myself in the future who were dumb enough to open up this can of worms. Or should that be verms? Or worms? I don't know anymore. Thank you to all my patrons who support Name Explain on a monthly basis. Name Explain depends on small monthly donations from fans like you to help keep the channel running. Just the small amount of $2 a month helps out in a huge way, grants you patron exclusive Name Explain extras, and gets your name here with all these awesome people. Thank you.